Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a decade since the attacks of September 11, 2001. We are in danger of losing our most precious heritage, not because a band of thugs threatens our freedom, but because we are at risk of forgetting who we are and what makes the United States a truly great nation. In the last 10 years, we have begun to let go of our freedoms, bit by bit, with each new executive order, court decision, and yes, act of Congress. The changes in this bill to the laws of detention have major implications for our fundamental rights. We should not be considering this as a rider to the Defense Authorization Bill. This should have been the subject of close scrutiny by the Judiciary Committee. The complex legal and constitutional issues should have been properly analyzed and the implications for our values carefully considered. You will hear that this bill merely recodifies existing law, but many legal scholars tell us it goes a great deal further than what the law now allows, that it codifies claims of executive power against our liberties that the courts have never confirmed. You will hear that it really won't affect U.S. citizens, although again, there is credible legal authority that tells us just the opposite. You will hear that it doesn't really turn the military into a domestic police force, but that clearly isn't the case. Most of all, you will hear that we must do this to be safe when the opposite is true. We can never be safe without our liberties, and this bill continues the decade-long campaign to destroy those liberties. This bill goes far beyond the authorization for the use of military force. That resolution authorized all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons the President determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons. This bill is not limited to those responsible for the September 11th attacks and those who aided or harbored them. It includes anyone who, quote, substantially supported al-Qaeda and the Taliban, or, quote, associated forces that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners, unquote. It is not clear what is meant by substantially supported, or what it takes to be associated with someone who substantially supported them. It refers to any belligerent act, or to someone who has, quote, directly supported such hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. It doesn't, as does our criminal law, say material support, so we really don't know whether that support could be merely a speech or an article or something else. So let's not pretend that this is just the same as the AUMF. If it were, there would be no need to pass this law. We have it already. Courts, in reading legislation, operate on the very sensible assumption that Congress doesn't write surplus language, that it must have intended to do something. Here it is pretty clear that we are expanding the reach of the AUMF beyond the 9/11 perpetrators and those who aided and harbored them. Whoever it reaches, and we don't know, but whoever it reaches, the government would have the authority to lock them up without trial until, quote, the end of hostilities, unquote, which, given how broadly the AUMF has been used to justify actions far from Afghanistan, might mean forever. And who will be taken out of the civilian justice system and imprisoned forever without a trial? The bill says anyone who, quote, is determined, unquote, to be covered by the statute. It doesn't say determined by whom or what protections there are to ensure that an innocent person doesn't disappear into a military prison. That's not America. We also need to be clear that the so-called Feinstein Amendment does not really provide the protection its sponsor intended to provide. The Feinstein Amendment says that, quote, nothing in this section shall be construed to affect existing law or authorities relating to the detention of United States citizens, lawful resident aliens of the United States, or any other persons who are captured or arrested in the United States, close quote. So what are existing law and authorities? As former FBI Director William Sessions has recently written, the provision does not limit such detention authority to people captured on the battlefield. The reality is that current law and the scope of such executive authority is unsettled. Director Sessions goes on to point out that in the two cases where the Supreme Court might have decided the question of detaining a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident, the U.S. claimed that the President had the authority. The administration claimed the President had the authority to detain a suspected terrorist captured within the United States indefinitely without charge or trial. In both these cases, Padilla and Dalmari, the government changed course and decided to try them in civilian courts in order to avoid a Supreme Court ruling on that question, and that question remains undetermined. So when the Feinstein Amendment references existing law, you should not assume that means the current law clearly deprives the President of this dangerous power. I hope it does, but it is still legally an open question. We should ensure that our liberty is protected and not leave that question to some future court. And we should certainly not enact a law codifying, and that's what this law does. It codifies, it puts into law terrifying claims of power made by presidents, but never approved by the courts or until now by the Congress. And that's the fundamental reason we should reject this bill. We must take great care. Our liberties are too precious to be cast aside in times of peril and fear. We have the tools to deal with those who would attack us. I'll yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman use himself an additional 30 seconds.
We do not need to do this. We should not do this. And because of this momentous challenge to one of the founding principles of the United States, that no person may be deprived of his liberty without due process of law, this bill must be rejected.